Real people, real twists. Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're counting down our picks for the top 10 times plot twists happened in real life. For this list, we're going over the occasions when unexpected or shocking events played out in real life and in history. Number 10. Caesar's joking revenge. Let's say you're a Sicilian pirate just minding your own business, sailing the seven seas, and kidnapping random folks for ransom. Then one day, one of your victims doesn't react in a distressed way. He actually suggests you're asking too little for his ransom, and proceeds to get along with you and your pirate buddies famously. In fact, he treats you more like a subordinate than a captor, and even threatens to crucify you. You'd be pretty thrown off by this behavior, right? Well, when the person you've kidnapped is a 25-year-old nobleman by the name of Julius Caesar, it starts to make a bit more sense. After about a month, Caesar's ransom was paid, and he made good on his promise. He raised forces to capture the pirates and saw to their crucifixions. Number 9. Hemingway's Paranoia. Ernest Hemingway was a celebrated American author, but he was also a soldier, a war correspondent, and even worked with the FBI. Given his time spent in Cuba, the last of these was particularly helpful to the US government. Hemingway was initially unimpressed with the organization, but his derision turned to fear as time went on. In his later years, Hemingway was convinced the Bureau was keeping tabs on him, following him around and even bugging his hospital room at the Mayo Clinic. 20 years after his death, the Freedom of Information Act allowed the truth to come out. The FBI really was following and monitoring Hemingway, primarily due to his support of Castro's regime in Cuba. Number 8. A change in strategy. Miyamoto Musashi was one of the most famous Japanese swordsmen to ever live, remaining undefeated even after fighting 61 duels. For the purpose of this entry, though, we'll be discussing just a few of them. In 1604, Musashi challenged Yoshioka Seijiro, the master of the Yoshioka school, to a duel. Despite arriving late, as was his habit, Musashi defeated and physically disabled Seijiro. The heir to the school, Seijiro's 12-year-old son, challenged him next, but he assembled a group of men armed with swords, bows, and guns to lie in wait for the perpetually late swordsman. However, to everyone's surprise, Musashi actually arrived early for a change and ambushed the group, managing to kill many of them and escape. Number 7. Ambiguous spy. Chevalier d'Eon was an 18th century French soldier and spy. d'Eon worked undercover in both Russia and England, and that undercover work was aided by an androgynous appearance. There was even a running bet about which gender d'Eon truly was. The mysterious spy eventually identified as female, claiming to have maintained a male appearance so that Louis d'Eon de Beaumont, d'Eon's father, could inherit from his in-laws. d'Eon was forced to wear only women's clothing after this declaration. In another twist to the story, however, an autopsy later revealed that d'Eon may have been born intersex, which would account for this fascinating figure's androgyny. Number 6. Anti-corruption switch. Chester A. Arthur began his career in politics as a poster boy for the stalwart faction of the Republican Party. As a group, they favored awarding positions to friends and those close to them, rather than, based on merit. Naturally, people panicked when the more moderate James Garfield was assassinated, with his assassin proclaiming his support for the stalwarts and Arthur. However, Arthur then shocked everyone by backing reform that mandated government positions go to those most qualified by signing the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act into law in 1883. For once, being a two-faced politician worked out to everyone's benefit.
Arthur didn't have an impressive presidency, but it was more than competent. And considering how it started, that's, impressive.
Number 5. Cold War experiments created a monster. In the late 1950s, Harvard psychologist Henry Murray conducted experiments on students, possibly as part of the CIA mind control program Project MKUltra.
Henry Murray was using students to study the effect of stress. He did that by subjecting them to long periods of intense interrogation designed to break down their egos, to break down their confidence.
The experiments were purposely brutal and involved tearing down the beliefs of the subjects and making them question everything they once believed. One of these subjects, used as a control and codenamed Lawful, was underage at the time, and a prodigy who later went on to become an assistant math professor at UC Berkeley. That means he must have left past traumas behind him, right?
The boy codenamed Lawful recorded higher stress levels under questioning than any other participant.
Well, in 1969, he abruptly resigned from Berkeley and later retreated to a remote cabin in Montana, essentially becoming a hermit. He started mailing bombs to airlines and universities. And if you haven't guessed already, Lawful was Ted Kaczynski, more famously known as the Unabomber.
As a young man, he was so conventional that he was codenamed Lawful. But the FBI now calls him Unabomber. His real name, Ted Kaczynski.
Number 4, the do-over that launched a world war. In the early 20th century, Austria-Hungary was occupying Bosnia-Herzegovina, which was then part of Serbia. The Serbs were upset. To that end, a Serbian military society planned to assassinate Archduke Franz Ferdinand when he visited Sarajevo for a state visit. But despite their plans, their attempt at killing the Archduke by bombing his motorcade ended in failure.
The bomb was thrown by Nedeljko Čebrinović, a member of the young Serbian nationalist movement. There are a few injuries, but Ferdinand and his wife are unharmed.
After surviving this ordeal, the Archduke decided to visit those who'd been injured in the bombing in the hospital, ending up stopped right next to a would-be assassin.
Gavrilo Princip just happens to be standing outside Schiller's Delicatessen when suddenly the Archduke's car turns into Franz Joseph Street. Completely by chance, fate has brought the assassin and his target within 10 feet of each other.
Franz Ferdinand was assassinated, and the First World War was sparked as a result.
And it's fair to say that that bullet, that second bullet, has enormous consequences in history.
That bullet kills 20 million people.
Number 3, ships in disguise. Armed merchant vessels may be something of an oddity nowadays, but they've been fairly common throughout history, given the need to defend oneself on the open water. During wartime, some of these vessels were converted and used in battle. During World War I, the Germans modified one of these merchant cruisers, the Cap Trafalgar, to resemble a British merchant ship, the RMS Carmania, in the hopes of catching the real enemy by surprise. But twist! Unfortunately for them, the first vessel they ran into was the real RMS Carmania, which engaged it and promptly sank its German doppelganger. Number 2, Olga gets revenge. After Igor of Kiev, ruler of the Kievan Rus in the 10th century, was murdered by a tribe called the Drevlians, his wife Olga became regent. To prevent a war, the Drevlians proposed that Olga marry their prince, who had had her husband killed. Far from being a meek widow, Olga had their first ambassadors buried alive, the second group burned alive, and had those that came to her husband's funeral feast massacred. The Drevlians gave up and surrendered, begging her to spare their lives, which Olga agreed to. But she asked for birds from each home as a sort of tribute.
My king has married, and I owe my new queen a wedding gift.
Aw, she turned over a new leaf. Nice. Oh, wait, what? She tied burning fabric to these birds because she knew they lived in the roofs of their homes and burned down their entire city? Gotcha. Before we unveil our number 1 pick, here are some twisty honorable mentions. Spanish double agent. Juan Pujol Garcia created a fake fascist identity and passed misinformation to the Nazis.
Juan Pujol, codenamed Garbo by MI5, Alaric by the Abwehr, is probably the most important double agent of all time.
First female U.S. president. Woodrow Wilson's wife Edith assumed his duties for over a year after a stroke.
Immediately, Edith moved to protect her husband from the burdens of the presidency and began to sort through the piles of papers gathering on his desk.
High-level spy double agents. Kim Philby almost led MI6 before he and others were exposed as Soviet spies.
Furthermore, because I'd been born into the British governing class, because I knew a lot of people of an influential standing, I knew that they would never get too tough with me. They'd never try to beat me up or knock me around. Because if they had been proved wrong afterwards, I could have made a tremendous scandal.
Mobster FBI connection. Whitey Bulger informed on his rivals to take over their territory.
For 20 years, one man ran the city of Boston. He controlled the cops, the politicians, and the criminals. His name was James Joseph Bulger, but on the streets of Boston, he was simply known as Whitey.
Man turned up at his own funeral. Tim Dexter faked his death and then rampaged when everyone, quote, wasn't sad enough. Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. Number 1. Peace treaty leads to more war. Peace treaties are generally meant to stop wars, not start them. However, that was exactly what the Treaty of Versailles, which concluded World War I, did.
In many cases, they were dealing with factors way outside their control or anyone else's control, outside anyone's ability to control. How do you control ethnic nationalism? We haven't made such a great job of it today.
The Allied powers insisted on reparations from Germany that devastated their economy. So when a charismatic leader and public speaker named Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party came along, the country was ripe for exploitation. And the next thing you know, World War II had begun.
Each step Hitler and his government took to counter the Treaty of Versailles reinforced his hold on German society.
Although the First World War had been called the war to end all wars, this second conflict ended up being the deadliest in history. If a peace treaty that's meant to stop and prevent wars actually initiates one isn't a real-life plot twist, we don't know what is.
The Treaty of Versailles was supposed to give meaning to the lives of the tens of millions of dead and wounded in the Great War. It didn't do that. It did teach that military conquest alone offers no lasting safety.
Do you agree with our picks? Check out this other recent clip from WatchMojo, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.